Hi, everybody. We're Group 1, or also known as Monica Biernat, and we're here today to present our wrap up discussion about social cognitive and attitudes. So, let's go a few modules back and refresh ourselves. What is the definition of social cognitive? So, here we presented a bunch of different definitions of social cognition coming from different researches. According to Hess and Pickett, it's the area of psychology that focuses on how people think about others and about the social world. In terms of thinking, it talks about how our minds process, store, and apply information about other people in different situations, as mentioned in the research of Park et al. It's like a mechanism that mediates the individual's responses to the social environment. And since it helps us understand and predict behavior of ourselves and others, it becomes a tool in decision making and forming judgments.
So, who are we as social perceivers? We human beings are called social perceivers because we constantly interact and communicate with other people. And these constant communication and interaction with other people teaches us and helps us to adapt and understand the real world. And because of this, we are considered as social perceivers because we perceive social situations and social beings, or aka other people. So, as social perceivers, we try to understand and perceive different social situations and different people in different situations because this is the key to survival. Next, as social perceivers, our behaviors are situated within a context which we perceive by the use of psychological mechanisms. So, psychologically, we come up with impressions of other people, judgments, and analysis of how we see them, how we see other people. And next, social cues as mental representations that become a tool that helps us throughout life. So, as social perceivers, we do not only um, try to understand and grasp verbal cues, but also nonverbal cues like body language or like expression, because as social beings, we also use that to interact with each other. And then impressions to make inferences and schemas. It allows us to read and understand other people's verbal and nonverbal cues. Again, we do not only just communicate through words, we also communicate through actions and through expressions. And from this, whenever we see other people, whenever we see their expressions, and whenever we create impressions in our mind about other people, we build in ourselves our or we build the concept of schema, or like our judgment based on what we believe in and based on what other people show us or what they present to us.
Social cognition applies in essentially every social interaction and situation that one could think of. As mentioned in the comments of Raina Nevales and Megan Cabazor, social cognition could be observed depending on the environment that we are currently in, which in turn influences the way we behave to better fit that environment. In the same comment by Raina, she mentioned the concept of event schemas, also known as scripts, which allow us to experience new situations with ease, such as going out amidst the ongoing pandemic, taking the necessary precautions so as not to get infected. Social cognition is also present in situations that involve people we do and do not know. Several comments in the discussion mentioned that they are much noisier and goofier when they are with their friends, but they can also be serious and quiet when they are in a situation such as a formal event. In the social world, social norms and expectations are naturally formed, and given its nature, an individual is expected to follow them so as not to go against what is normal. An example is knowing when and when not to speak. Like what Alex Lozada and myself commented, it is like the saying, think before you speak, reminding you to gauge when you should participate in a discussion, especially if you do not know what the discussion is about, and to take cues from it to better understand the context and to figure out the best way to insert yourself into the discussion. In the discussion, all the students recognize how social cognition is applied in real life. Therefore, they are aware about the ability and understanding and responding appropriately to other people's social approach. In addition, social cognition and attitudes entail that a person's self-portrayal and interaction with other people are based on their cognition strategies and techniques, such as schema, heuristic, and other social cues. Another example given by our classmate Vince Grajo and further pointed out by Albert Bofill that relatively explains why social cognition, or how we perceive people, affects the way we behave or see things is President Duterte. Vince mentioned that the reason as to why some people see him as one of the people is due to how he presents himself. His dark skin and way of speaking can more or less explain why the marginalized people relate to him and see him as someone who understands them. His physical appearance really shows Filipino features, and his exterior shows simplicity. Even if we know that he is indeed rich, some marginalized people identify him as being in the same social category because of his mere appearance.
So, what is a schema and what is an attitude? And what is the relevance of these two concepts in social cognition? Schema is a mental model or representation of any of the various things that we come across our daily lives. Attitude, on the other hand, is a knowledge representation that includes primarily our liking or disliking of a person, thing, or group. What is a schema? A schema is basically a mental blueprint of how we expect something or someone to be or behave. Um, the schemas are organized body of general information of beliefs that we develop from direct encounters as well as from second-hand sources. So, according to what I wrote in the discussion for social cognition, schemas are based on internal assumptions that are heavily influenced by experiences, upbringing, society's norms, and culture. So, schemas can sometimes be the cause of erroneous impressions, such as stereotypes and discrimination. And like the example that I said in the discussion, wherein a lady was judging a person from the LGBT community because of her schema or what she believes in. She believes that these people are evil. She believes that these people have hidden agendas. We can say that this is part of um, the old lady's schema. Like it was built in her head that people from the LGBT community are evil or they have hidden agendas or they're not pure because of what they are. And just like this person, her schema, it was influenced by her beliefs and how she expects other people to behave. So she's generalizing everyone. She's generalizing all people from the LGBT community na, no, because I know someone like this, ganyan silang lahat. That they're all evil, they're all um, impure or whatever. One of our classmates also commented, Joy Ibiga, that we often rely on our schemas to know how to act other towards people because schemas are basically our impressions. For example, if we see someone who's very intimidating, we condition ourselves to act very formal towards them and very attentive because we don't wanna we don't wanna offend them, or since we're intimidated, we're kind of shy towards them, and we don't want to do something that will um, make their impression of us, kumbaga, ayaw natin na ma-off sila sa atin because we're intimidated by them. So what is attitude? Attitude, on the other hand, again, as I've said, is the knowledge or representation that includes primarily our liking or disliking of people or things. So our classmate also, Jared Castro, he said that attitudes vary per person. The example he gave was how his friend made an offensive joke, and while he, Jared, wasn't offended, his other friend was offended and even called him out. So we have different attitudes toward different social situations. Kaya there's no universality when it comes to attitude because we're all different. Another one of our classmates, Albert Bofil, he addressed the vexation between the Dilawans and the DDS, or the supporters of President Duterte. And since they have their own opinions and attitudes about each other, since they differ, it shows that they have developed this particular attitude regarding the two sides based on which aligns most with their personal beliefs and views. So attitude is how you act towards your impressions or like your beliefs. It's how you manifest these beliefs and how you express them in everyday life. So what's the relevance of these two concepts? So one outcome of our experiences is the development of mental representations about our environments. So it includes schemas and attitudes. Once these have developed, our schemas influence our subsequent learnings, such that the new people and situations that we encounter are interpreted and understood in terms of existing knowledge. This means that whenever we meet new people or whenever we get impressions for people, it's automatically affected by our schemas and attitudes. Like, even if sometimes we say na, oh, wala naman akong judgment, I can't say anything about her or him, or like when someone asks you their first impression, like your first impression of them, for sure, you do have a first impression of them. And sometimes it may be unconscious, or maybe you did it unconsciously, like maybe you judged them, or you thought of them as someone who's intimidating, or someone who's cute, or someone who's mabait. Like, um, automatic, nandun yun, naiisip mo yun kapag nami-meet mo yung tao. So that's the relevance of attitude and schemas in our everyday lives, because every day we meet new people and we have impressions of them, and every day we meet new people and we use these schemas and attitude to adjust or to act, to know how to act towards them. So how do these attitudes develop? Attitudes develop according to our environment and personal experiences. As Arthur mentioned, attitude, like everyone, we all have different attitudes. There's no universality because we all have different environments and we all have different personal experiences. And social cognition influences us on how we are to react to situations. And attitudes is how we respond to certain social situations. So one of our classmates, Alex, said she made the valid point that one's attitude can be reflected while doing group works. So how? How we pay attention to other people and how we express our own opinions, it can show our attitude. For example, during group works, if a person doesn't like to pay attention to what others say, like he's only fixated on what he wants, like his own ideas, and he wants to impose those ideas to the whole group, like he would express his opinions just to push his idea. We can say that he has an attitude of being not open, or like being a bit egotistic in a sense, because he only wants his ideas to come across and he's not open to other people. So our perspective on social world our perspective on the social world is heavily influenced by experiences, beliefs, and upbringing, and these are sustained in our social cognition and attitudes. That's why other people, like how they act or how they are, like with their friends, with their family, sometimes kapag tinatanong natin kung bakit sila ganun, or when we try to understand, it sometimes roots to their upbringing or their childhood, like how they grew up and kung paano sila pinalaki. Sometimes it affects how they are as a person now. And yeah, we also have to be very understanding of other people and not judge them initially, because we should understand that we all have different upbringings and we all have different experiences, and we may not all speak about it. So we should learn more about people before we judge them. So one of her classmates, Julia, she mentioned also that her procrastination towards studying stems from her dislike of a subject. So this attitude of procrastinating, it comes from her experience of being bored or not liking the subject. So another one of her classmates, which is also our group mate, Monica, she reiterated that our perspective on things affects our behavior towards it. So sometimes, for example, let's say when it comes to the political spectrum or the political issues. The example earlier, like the BDS and Dilawan, they not, well, not necessarily hate each other, but there's a disparity between those two because they have different perspectives, and they manifest or they express those differences by imposing their ideas and saying that they hate each other's ideas and they hate each other's stance on the political spectrum. Kaya doon, naapektuhan talaga yung behavior natin and naapektuhan yung attitude natin and how we act towards other people in that certain situation. When someone disagrees with you, lumalabas yung attitude, siguro na you get super assertive or passive aggressive or aggressive.
Culture also plays a significant role in the social environment as well as people's perception. In the comment by Mira Oriarte, she mentioned that to conduct oneself from a different country is dependent on the culture and norms of that particular country. A good example based from Mika Awid's comment is that when her family went to Japan, she observed that one must stand on the left side of the escalator instead of the right side, as it is for walking given that the rules are different. This shows the importance of understanding the effect of culture on a person's perception, and its impact on cognition can help a person abide and adjust in different cultures. Since people differ in beliefs and cultural practices, we interpret situations differently. We act upon different circumstances based on how we construe the event, the people around us, and their behavior.
So now that we've refreshed ourselves about the definition of social cognition, attitude, schema, and the relevance of it all, we could now ask ourselves, is social cognition important? So if you paid attention to the previous reporters, I think we both share the same answer at this point. It's a very big yes. But how? Social cognition is important because this is how we learn and understand things. Like what Raina mentioned in her comment, social cognition guides us on how we should properly act during online classes. We know this information because our social cognition is aware of how people think or react about other things. So we know that if we talk while other people are talking or while the professor is talking, we know that it is in a way distracting people and it will cause disruption in class. Well, according to the research of Pramanik 2019, social cognition is the ability to understand and infer other people's feelings, thoughts, and intentions. It is what allows us to understand the mental state of others so that we're able to predict their behavior and adjust our decisions accordingly. So, upon knowing this, we come to the realization that social cognition is very essential in our lives. To reiterate, we need it in order to survive. As mentioned previously, it has a lot to do with building attitudes and schemas. These are two things which help us see and understand the world and ourselves. In terms of survival, it helps us make decisions. So if you look in our previous discussion, a common theme found in the comments is that it's about decision making. Every second of every minute of every hour of every day, we are left with numerous situations which require us to make decisions. You see, successful decision making involves our ability to understand the intentions, emotions, and beliefs of other people, considering that more often than not, decision making is not always made independently. That explains why we always ask other people for their opinions, or we unconsciously go with the flow of our surroundings while we make choices. So it's usually influenced by information that we've acquired from society we belong to or based on the social cues given by the people around us. These two factors are which many individuals give a lot consideration to. And social context exerts a significant influence on our decisions. This is what justifies our decision to conform to moral and social norms. So the information we acquire, store, and process and act based on the environment is where the majority of our decisions are made. Whether it be about how we choose to act around our friends or our peers, um, whether how we choose to handle our relationships, how we choose to perceive the world around us and social issues, how we choose to work, or how we choose to approach people, all of it requires social cognition because it helps us make sense out of everything. And like based on what Alex mentioned in the discussion, we tend to develop certain attitudes, whether it may be positive or negative, towards other people depending on how we interpret their behavior. Social cognition helps us bridge a gap between inner mental processes and overt behavior of an individual, as mentioned by the research of Pramanik 2019. So ultimately, social cognition is very essential. It helps us make successful decisions and interactions, but most and more importantly, it enables us to interpret the world around us more effectively.
Now that we have seen how important social cognition is in our lives, what are the bad sides about social cognition? Do you actually think that social cognition is as positive as you think? Let's start with, is social cognition too focused on individualistic behavior? In this part of the presentation, we are going to talk about the relationship of social cognition and individualistic behavior. When we talk about individualistic behavior, it focuses on the term independence, which relates to self-concept. So when a person processes situational and social cues, it operates one's social cognitive thinking. And there are a lot of factors that affect social cognition, such as experiences, unconscious thoughts, personal beliefs, values, attitudes, and many more. These factors interact and have an influence on each other. An example of this is the concept of schema. People use schemas to make sense of themselves, such as self-schema. Based on the PowerPoint, self-schema is a working structure that uses perceptions, memories, generalizations from past experiences to form one's self-concept. This shows that self-schema and self-concept are interconnected by mediating one's behavior and contributes to defining oneself. It also reveals that social cognition fixates on individualistic behavior based on the concept of schema.
So, what are the emerging errors in social cognition? First, we have the fundamental attribution error, wherein people presume that our personality traits are the sole reason for our behavior. Second is the self-serving bias, which focuses on people's tendency to praise themselves for positive outcomes but blame external factors for negative outcomes. Lastly, we have the just world hypothesis, which is the belief that people get the outcomes that they deserve, according to Lerner and Miller, 1978. One of the most common errors in social cognition is the fundamental attribution error. This type of error usually leads to poor judgment and stereotyping because it disregards other factors that may have contributed to our behavior. An example of this is when a child forgets to do her part of the house chore because she was busy with schoolworks, and her mother would instantly assume that it is because of her laziness. This is an error because the mother suddenly jumped to the conclusion that her child's behavior is caused by her personality trait, which is laziness, without considering other situational factors. Furthermore, this type of error changes our perspective on people. It tends to create close-minded people and may affect our personal relationships negatively. While not necessarily an error, people have the tendency to have certain biases when it comes to social cognition, which we can call the self-serving bias. So, to put it simply, this bias describes people's tendency to apply praise to themselves for a positive outcome, but shift the blame on external factors for negative outcomes. An example of this is when you get a high score for a test, attributing it to how well you studied, but when you get a low score, you instead attribute it to the test being too difficult for a student of your level. This example perfectly illustrates self-serving bias because we tend to have a bias on our attitudes towards certain situations or outcomes which affect how we process and interpret circumstances. When it's beneficial to us, we praise ourselves and think that the sole reason for our success is due to our hard work. And when it's something disappointing to us, we tend to dissociate ourselves from the situation as if we didn't have anything to do with it. This type of bias, according to Cherry 2020, also acts as a defense mechanism that secures our self-esteem and removes our personal responsibility.
Another common error behind social cognition is the just world hypothesis. This can be seen as a loophole in cognition because it involves victim blaming. Now, when bad things happen to other people, we may tend to assume that those people somehow are responsible for their own fate. A good example of this is a stereotypical belief that women invite their own sexual harassment by the manner in which they dress. And within this culture of victim blaming, the negative social reactions actually stems from how the society perpetuates the same rape myths repeatedly, which alters one's perception that subjects to various social cognitive errors and biases.
In summation, social cognition is what molds us into emotional human beings who experience sympathy and empathy towards other people. Our ability to develop an understanding and a certain attitude towards other people's feelings, thoughts, emotions, behavior, and social situations is ultimately due to our social cognition. This is how we learn to respond to certain situations and behave respectively around certain people.
Social cognition plays a very pivotal role, especially in Filipino lifestyle, because we are inclined to the collectivist approach in culture, and social cognition involves our psychological and mental processes that allow us to fit into social groups and social situations. We agree that although social cognition is important as it acts as building blocks to how we perceive and react to the external world, just like everything else, there is a downside to it. All the loopholes or errors in social cognition mentioned earlier represent an individualist approach. Fundamental attribution error focuses on our belief that people behave due to their personality traits. Self serving bias, on the other hand, centers on our personal beliefs that is favorable to us. Lastly, the just world hypothesis focuses on people's belief that everything that we experience, both good and bad, is due to our actions alone.